Could someone create a beer called the Dark Web that is a... What kind of beer do you like to drink? Is it you like IPAs, right?
Yeah.
No, you like drinks that you have to slice that old men drink, don't you? So.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 57 of Bad Voltage. My name is Jeremy. As usual, I have Stuart and Jono with me. And in a kind of an unbelievable turn of events here, we are once again not just going to do a story or a show that is comprised of nothing but news. But we are going to talk about what I believe is going to turn into a pretty lengthy, pretty meaty topic here that is going to elicit some opinions from our listeners and certainly from the three of us. So we should probably jump right in so that we don't spend all of the time in the intro and none of the time on said topic. So, Mr. Langridge, what are we going to talk about?
Okay, so bit of background here first. For those of you who haven't come across this piece of news, Cloudflare have pulled their support for 8chan. Cloudflare were 8chan is one of the chans. I don't know how you describe it.
Description.
I have been accused in the past of prejudicing things by the way I describe them. So we'll say it's a message board full of either people who are the lunatic right wing or think it's funny to pretend to be the lunatic right wing. And Cloudflare provided them with DDoS protection, as they do for lots and lots and lots of other people.
Right.
And Cloudflare decided to pull their support, to drop that. And
this was after, just as a tiny bit of context, which will make sense if you're listening to the show now as we record this, but maybe not in 2 years. This was in response to a couple of mass shootings that happened in the US.
Yes, that's fair. So 8chan had to find another provider. They managed to do so. They moved to a company called Epic. And then Epic's infrastructure provider, who are called Voxility, pulled support for Epic, which took down 8chan again, and also took down the Daily Stormer as quite a nice little side effect. Hooray! Who were also also being provided by Epic through an acquisition they made a while back. But the thing which prompted me into this discussion is a chap called Kevin Roos, who I don't know, tweeted the following thing. He said, "There's a big."
Is this just some random dude, or is
it's just some random person? Okay, I don't know who he is. He may turn out to be super famous. At which point, I will pen an apology. But as far as I'm aware, he's just a guy.
Will you?
Super freak. Okay.
I won't actually pen an apology, just to be clear, but nonetheless. He said, there's a big interesting debate here about which layers of the internet should be responsible for banning extreme content. Everyone, mostly, agrees ISPs like Comcast shouldn't. Everyone, mostly, agrees social networks like Facebook should. Cloudflare is somewhere in the middle. And I thought to myself, well, big interesting debates. We're all about that sort of thing.
We are all about that. Well, we're certainly we think it's interesting.
Yeah, totally.
You folks might not think it's interesting.
So the question that I want to talk about, I don't really want to go into 8chan specifically here, or
no, it's not that interesting.
It's they're an implementation detail. The question here is, who should be responsible for banning this sort of extreme content? Where do we draw the line? Is the line currently being drawn in approximately the right place? What do you chaps think?
Can I ask a question before we get into it?
Yeah.
So the guy's tweet, you cut out for me for a second while you were reading it out. Was he saying that he said that Comcast shouldn't be the people who are making decisions about what...
He wasn't giving his own opinion. What he said was, everyone mostly agrees that ISPs like Comcast shouldn't be doing it. Everyone mostly agrees social networks like Facebook should.
Right.
Yeah.
And Cloudflare are somewhere in the middle of those two things.
In terms of should and shouldn't, in terms of banning these kinds of sites,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure everybody necessarily even thinks that social networks should be doing that.
Right.
There's a lot of questions around, for example, Facebook's behavior that is, so I'm just saying that, like, this is probably a lot more loose than even he is thinking.
And just for a little bit of context, he is the tech columnist for the New York Times.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So he's slightly more famous than just a guy. Okay. But that's exactly the point. Exactly as you say there is a big, interesting debate here. And
there is.
What are your thoughts?
Go on, Jeremy, kick us off.
I'll try to kick this off. So this is interesting for me for a couple of different reasons. One, I personally really liked the idea of a free, open, distributed internet where no single company, no single government has the power to control what is distributed, what's discussed, how it works, etc. Right? And part of that, I think, in my naivety years ago, I really thought the internet would turn into the ultimate equalizer, and I genuinely thought that. And I think my worldview on kind of education, and I don't even mean formal education here, but the ability to learn, and I guess more importantly, access to information, is why I thought it would be the ultimate equalizer, right? It's really difficult to keep down an educated, informed population, and you don't need to look further than Gutenberg and the printing press to see that that's well understood, exactly. I think, by most people. What I didn't realize then, and what is a sad, disappointing, I think, realization to me now, is the power to spread information and to share that knowledge and to gain access to that knowledge, I think, is now being overshadowed by the ability to spread disinformation and to taint knowledge. And I didn't anticipate that then, and I'm kind of disappointed, and by kind of I mean supremely, ultimately, just shattered by this. Because I don't know what this means for us. This kind of goes back to the deep fakes conversation we had a couple episodes ago. If you can't believe what you're seeing and you can't believe what you're reading and you can't really believe much of anything, how do you get information you trust? And to me, that's part of why this story is such an interesting debate. To me, it goes even one level further than censorship, which for some I don't know that it will.
Right. I think it's interesting because you're obviously 100% right. I mean, I think it's undeniable that but this is my personal view, that the internet has brought about a considerable more better. Let me rephrase. Has brought considerable benefits compared to disadvantages, right? So I think the access to education and people and building opportunity, I think the internet has facilitated a lot of that. But like with everything, there's always going to be a dark side, right? There are going to be people who are always going to abuse technology or abuse any kind of innovation in negative ways. The tricky thing in my mind is that people will always want to share information, and curiosity will always get the better of people, right? And we're never going to be able to stop that. So there are people out there, and some people who listen to this will say this, who absolutely categorically believe that there should be zero censorship at all on the internet, that you should just let every flag fly free and all the rest of it. But to me, that's kind of like the Second Amendment people in the US basically saying that there should be absolutely no regulation whatsoever, like the hardcore people around firearms, right? And to me, there's always got to be some level of control to keep the general populace healthy, right?
Sure.
The question, of course, is where do you draw those lines? And historically, governments have been put in a position for doing so. And it does worry me that private companies are doing this.
Right. I'm a little confused why this continues to get turned into a First Amendment issue for multiple reasons. One, the First Amendment obviously only applies to people in the United States, so not the internet very much. But even beyond that, even in the United States, the First Amendment only applies to the government entities and public utilities, things of that nature. It does not in any way, shape, or form, and never has applied to public companies. And even beyond that, even after it was a little bit more strictly enforced, for those of you not familiar with First Amendment semantics and the genesis of how things came along, there used to be what was called a clear and present danger clause, and that was the marker. I believe it was like in the 60s that changed. Now it's called the Brandenburg test, and what that is, even for the government, there's a test that how it's worded is the advocacy of force or criminal activity does not receive First Amendment protections if, one, the advocacy is directed to inciting or producing eminent lawless action, and two, is likely to incite or produce such action. So even the government has a right to suppress speech if it doesn't pass the Brandenburg test. So how this has suddenly become a First Amendment thing, I agree. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, and it's. I forget there was some comedian talked about this. I forget who it was or within what specific context, but what he was basically saying was, for people who are requiring absolute freedom in all possible scenarios, there are just, I think it was Jim Jeffries was saying that, there's always going to be someone who's going to fuck it up, right? Right? There's always going to be somebody who's going to ruin it for everybody else. And that's one of the reasons why you need to have rules in place. It's not to keep the responsible, good people in check. It's to keep the arseholes in check, right? Like, if we could guarantee that everybody on the internet was going to be publishing constructive, respectful material, then sure. Like, there shouldn't be any censorship, but there's going to be the underbelly of the internet, or there's going to be, abuses of power in various ways, and that makes it a lot more complicated. So to me, it's kind of an asinine argument for people to suggest that there shouldn't be any kind of restriction. So, I don't know. What do you think, Ak?
What do I think? It's actually quite a good question. So, John Stuart Mill, if you're looking for someone to point out and say, this whole idea of people being able to speak freely without being put in prison by the king, who came up with it, Mill is going to be somewhere in your fantasy football top 11 team for that. And one of the things that he said was that government restrictions, legal restrictions on your speech are way down the list of the things that prevent you from saying a bunch of stuff. A lot of what prevents people from saying things that society finds unpalatable or unpleasant or awful is social pressure. But if you've got sites where there isn't that social pressure, then what these things tend to do is egg one another on.
Right. Yeah.
So, and that ties into what Jeremy was saying about how this isn't a governmental issue at all. We have, I use we in a very loose collective sense, but we, technologists, have very carefully built the internet so it cannot be controlled or stopped by the government, and saw it as a virtue that we'd done so. But now that we have this thing that can't be stopped by the government, so laws can't prevent this sort of thing, what's happened is private companies have stepped in place. So Cloudflare don't technically have to have any control over anything. There's no rules saying that. They're just convenient. We've talked a lot in the past about private companies essentially acting as public utilities without any of the constraints that public utilities have to operate under. And Cloudflare is kind of similar to this. Now, in general, I'm not a big fan of companies saying, well, of course, we've got the rights to pull anything we like off the internet. We can do whatever we want because we're not the government. There are no laws restricting us. While at the same time saying, well, we're really too big to fail and we're really important and you have to pay attention to us. Right? It's all the deficits, all the benefits, none of the deficits approach to it. But in this, particular case, and in other cases like it, Cloudflare are entirely within their rights to do this. And the idea that there's a potentially chilling effect on free speech is, I suppose, technically the truth. But for every one person who's saying that with legitimate, real reasons to do so, there are 100 people waving a free speech banner when what they want to talk about is how much they hate Jews and not get banned for it. So I'm kind of inclined to say, I mean, there are other ways you can go. So 8chan in this particular example went to Epic, who then pulled them as well. But there are plenty of places in, there are Russian hosts, for example, which will host anything you want them to. They cost a lot of money, but presumably if you've got a lot of people who share your viewpoints, I'm not a big fan of the whole market forces thing either, as we've talked about in the past. But in this particular case, if free marketeers out there who want to defend this sort of thing, if they've got a lot of people who want to read this sort of appalling bullshit, then presumably those people will be happy to pay for it, and therefore hosting in some Russian host who'll charge you a lot of money and not ban anything you want to say is entirely viable.
You could make the argument that that the current system's actually working out reasonably well, in the sense of you don't have fundamental government control over the internet, which I think we'd all agree is a good thing. But
mostly because the question is, which government? ? Which Americans tend to think, but obviously our government.
Obviously it's us.
and everyone in Ecuador is like, you know what? Not as sure about that as you are.
So you could argue that the current system is working because the government isn't in control of the internet. As a general rule, you could argue, there are obviously flaws to this argument, that the conscience of the companies who are basically running the internet is generally okay. I mean, yes, there's been many issues with Facebook as an example. So the underbelly of the internet, while it will always exist, it's been basically pushed into the shadows to a point whereby a very small number of people will probably get access to it. So, for example, a good example here is the dark web, right? Like the dark web, from what I understand, is a minuscule portion of people connecting to the...
Because this gets on my nerves, not particularly that you're doing it, just when people do it generally. People talk about the dark web like it's some kind of mystical, weird thing that only hackers have access to. Let's call it what it is, which is access to sites through Tor.
Yeah,
right.
But I think that's a technical.
But at the end of the day, the dark web is what people refer to that as. So just deal with the fact, dude. That's how people refer to it. It might piss you off.
The point is that it makes it sound all sort of slightly romantic and exciting to call it that.
But I think the thing with the dark web is it's another technical hurdle that many people wouldn't be able to get over.
Absolutely.
In the way that they can get to websites. I think that's the one thing that I realized about, and like we said, 8chan specifically or 4chan specifically isn't really what it is. But I think the thing about 4chan that was more dangerous than I would initially suspected is what 4chan really was, especially in the beginning, was a place to troll.
Yes.
More than anything, right? And so some people trolled by saying edgy, racist, terrible things. And they didn't really do so because they thought that thing. They did it because they wanted to get a rise out of people. They thought it was funny, etc. The thing that happened that I don't know that most people, even the founders of 4chan, and clearly the founder of 8chan now regrets founding it. But I don't think what they realized is when you get a bunch of people saying a bunch of racist things, that becomes normalized. And what happens then is it attracts people who actually think those things. And that's not even the dangerous part. What the dangerous part is now, as those people become friends, it's difficult for them to filter on who's actually a neo-Nazi and who's just trolling. And when you are talking with a friend and you're not able to filter that thing out, those arguments sound more convincing because they're not coming from a troll. They're coming from a person that you're part of their community, and there's a general profession of their belief in there. And suddenly you went from trolling about being racist to being racist. And that I think it's kind of like moving from the backwoods to the town square, if you will. And it's that normalization that I think is more dangerous than people realize.
That I think exactly the point. To my mind, it's you've got trolls providing that kind of atmosphere, and then you've got actual neo-Nazis who show up. But what to me is most worrisome is the people who aren't sure whether they're neo-Nazis show up anyway and then essentially get radicalised.
Yes.
And that's how the
There's
community
almost like a social
grows.
pressure to adopt the beliefs of the most extreme person in the group because you want to be in the group.
Because that's what groupthink does. And to me, making this thing, having there be technical hurdles to getting to it. So sticking it on a Tor Onion address, for example, but also putting it in the dark web. I'm going to have as the picture.
Is this really?
I did not realize this was such a hot button issue for you.
Is this really the hill you want to die on? Is this it?
As the picture for the show, I'm just gonna Google for hacker, and all of the pictures I get will be some guy in a hoodie with a dark background and loads of green text on the screen. And everyone who draws those pictures and thinks that's what computers are uses words like the dark web, right? Anyway, moving on. This is not
carry on, old man language.
This is not the hill I actually want to die on. So
I was going to say there are many hills. There's a fucking mountain range.
Honestly, it's like the Himalayas inside my head. You wouldn't believe it. But if there are those technical hurdles to getting to this, then it becomes harder for people who are just dipping a toe in the water of flagrant racism and anti-Semitism and sexism and shooting people, and therefore they don't join and don't get radicalised.
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that,
and that's why I think Facebook banning this sort of thing is a good idea, and Cloudflare pulling support for it is a good idea, because it puts those hurdles in the way. So people who really want to seek this stuff out still can, which means that their right to say things has not been entirely removed. But look at the XKCD cartoon, about we're showing you the door. And that's the fact that you have the right to say this does not mean that everyone else has to listen to it. And if people want to make it more difficult to listen to your thing, then kind of okay with that.
So the thing is, where I think this gets tricky is, so if we basically are saying that the current system is obviously single government is controlling the internet. So a lot of these, more unsavory sites and communities are being really kind of pushed out to the side because the major cloud service providers are not going to be willing to host them and whatever else. So they're going to these like Russian sites or whatever else. If we're basically saying that's the way it works, I think for examples such as 8chan and 4chan, most people would broadly agree with that, right? That's fine. The system broadly is working. Some people are going to get access to them, so be it, but the general population is not, so it's going to reduce the level of radicalization. What worries me a little bit about this is, to your point earlier on, Ak, about the social pressure is what's kind of pushing people to change, is that works fine when the social pressure is, I think, representative of the right thing, right? What worries me a little bit, and we've seen a lot of this in the stand-up comedy world, is where some people will get really upset with a particular comedian for a particular bit that he or she is doing and claim that it is racist or misogynist or whatever else. And then there is a social pressure to either ban that comedian or to get their Netflix special taken down or whatever else. So there is a balance in my mind between, the clearly unsavory elements, but then as you push it towards not the examples that are less clear, you could potentially start edging into mob mentality that then pushed people off the internet for actually doing something that is okay, but disagreeable by some. So a good example I would have here would be someone like, who's a typical, pretty controversial comedian? Someone like
Bernard Manning.
Bernard Manning, right? Actually, most Americans are not going to know who he is.
Most non-Americans are not going to know who Andrew Dice Clay is.
That's a good point. They're basically the same.
Everyone knows who Andrew Dice Clay is.
So, I mean, these are basically comedians who just, Bernard Manning's dead now, but he traded in pretty racist, sexist kind of material. And there were a lot of people who were naturally pretty upset about him. I don't know what I think about, for example, there being a unified social effort to get someone like him taken off the internet. Because he, to me, was an unsavory character, and you could argue, this is where it gets tricky, right? Because you could argue that some people who looked at his jokes could be radicalized because they could think he was being serious. Now, he claimed repeatedly throughout his life that he was just joking. And to me, there's a lot of nuance in, there are some comedians, and I would say this about Bernard Manning, when I would see his bits, I don't think he was joking. I think he was being awful. But there are other comedians who will make jokes, and Seth Rogen talked about this in Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which is just came out, where he basically said, if you acknowledge the fact that you think that the premise is ludicrous, then people are much more okay with you. If you don't acknowledge, for example, if you make a sexist joke, and you clearly acknowledge that you think that this is sexist and it's ridiculous, but you make the joke because it's the context is what's funny in however you present it, people are more likely to be understanding than if you just come out and say a sexist statement and claim it as a joke. You see what I mean? So it gets tricky when you start edging into that territory because there is the risk that basically reasonable people just get bullied off the internet.
You see,
but I don't know how you mitigate against that because it's basically society's perspective, right?
Unfortunately, I think that viewpoint has a bunch of unpleasant downsides which we're currently living through. If what you're worried about is a mob mentality, bullying people off the internet for being sexist, then that's essentially because it ought to be okay to be sexist.
No, I'm not talking about that. Just to be very clear,
hang on.
To be very clear, because I'm not talking about a mob mentality to people who are being clearly sexist. What I'm talking about is a perception that something could be sexist. So there are comedians. The reason why I use comedians as an example is that there is ambiguity around a joke, right? So if there's ambiguity around a context, and then the society basically decides that thing is not good, then
this is like the thing from earlier. I think for every one person who really genuinely thinks that, there are 10 people who are sheltering under that umbrella in order to tell sexist jokes that they know are sexist and think are sexist and think it's okay to do so, and then going, oh no, but because Seth Rogen said it was a joke. Now, he may genuinely feel differently. I don't particularly know the guy. Didn't hear the thing.
Do you really think that for every person that may legitimately be making jokes about the context, right? Like, somebody makes a joke about 9/11, for example, right? Who makes it very clear that I'm not in any way advocating 9/11, but finds amusement within some level of context, right? Are you saying that there are going to be a ton of other people who are going to use that as an excuse to be just genuinely hateful people?
Yeah, I absolutely am saying that. 100%.
It's a pretty grim view of society, pal.
That's because we live in a pretty grim society. I'd much rather it wasn't like this. But that's I don't think that's
actually. I don't agree with that.
Ask yourself, how many people have you seen claiming that? What's that Twitter-like thing, but for racists?
Facebook.
Not. and you said I had the grid views. A gap.
This episode of Bad Voltage brought to you by Mark Zuckerberg.
Gap, it's what it's called, right?
Gab? No, I've never heard of it either.
GAB. It's basically it's like the Reddit for racists, Volt or whatever it was called.
Vote, yeah.
Vote, thank you. Yes.
Is that for racists? I thought that was just an alternative version of Reddit.
Oh well,
I don't know anything about it.
Well, as
I just remember it being founded when Reddit kicked a bunch of folks off.
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing.
Okay.
Right. And so, ask yourself, if you go and find people who are saying it's a really important free speech issue that these sites get to keep running, how many of them do you think are really there looking at it from a constitutional lawyer perspective and wanting to defend the rights of everyone like Voltaire, and how many of them are annoyed that they can no longer say all this stuff on Reddit where people got to see it? And I think it's massively skewed. Almost everyone I see arguing in favour of free speech these days, actually with those words, saying, but this is a really important free speech issue, is saying it about stuff where I basically don't think they should be able to say it. I don't think it's an honest, detached defence of the concept of speech and the worry about oppression. Is because they don't want to be oppressed anymore because society has gone, the things you say are hateful, shove off.
I think you're
maybe I have a skewed view of society. I don't know.
I think you're looking at it in a much more black and white perspective than it actually is. Like, a good example of this could be a discussion about abortion, right? Abortion is a topic that divides people, certainly in the US. An argument could be that a bunch of, anti-abortion people basically say, this is an absolute travesty that you have this website on the internet that's promoting baby killing. And then they basically combine as a mob to basically get that kicked off, right? Now, I would argue that a site that is proposing a set of discussion points and discussing the abortion issue, and maybe it skews towards a pro-abortion, stance, I think that should be on the internet. But let's be honest, we live in a society right now where it is not uncommon when people get frustrated about something that they rise together on social media as a mob and they basically bully people. Now, there are certain cases where I think it's legitimate when that should happen, like anti-Semitism, sexism, racism. That shit shouldn't happen. But what I'm saying is that this is becoming a pattern that you could argue could be used to kick people off the internet and put undue pressure on people off the internet that really shouldn't be kicked off the internet. Because the whole point of the internet is that we're supposed to exchange different perspectives and different ideas. The point is that we shouldn't have hubs of child pornography and racism and anti-Semitism and all this nasty shit on there, right?
As far as I could tell, what you're describing is a fictional example. I mean, yeah, it fits in with the pattern, but as far as I can tell, it isn't happening. There are some people who are attempting to weaponize things like codes of conduct to get people with pro-choice sites kicked off the internet. Yes, absolutely. But as far as I can tell, it either isn't happening or it isn't working. Exactly what the difference is between these things. But for everyone saying, but if we kick Nazis off and make it more difficult to read their stuff, then what happens when the decent people come along and get kicked off? And my response is kind of, but that largely isn't happening. You're worrying about a fictional problem, and in doing so, you're making it harder to fix an actual problem that we genuinely have right now.
What I'm saying is, I'm not making it harder to do. I mean, I'm just talking about it, right? So I'm not saying anything should happen specifically. And we're talking about this within the broader context of where is this leading us? And what I'm saying is that this is one potentially difficult trend of this, right? Is that we've identified that the norm today is that companies are basically the gatekeepers of the internet, right? And what gets the gatekeepers of the internet to change? PR shitstorms. That's what, whenever you see anything happen with the company changing its policy, it's a PR shitstorm.
Yes.
Cloudflare didn't get rid of 8chan before the mass shootings.
No.
It was afterwards, because it's a fucking PR shitstorm. So what I'm saying is that given the fact that we are in an outrage culture that's increasingly forming, and I think some of that outrage, again, is justified and some of it is not justified, is that could potentially be a situation where these companies are under more and more scrutiny to kick people off when there is a mob forming. I'm just saying it's a risk. I'm not saying it's happening today. No, it's not happening today.
That's fair. I mean, I wrote a tweet about this a couple of days ago. Not actually anything to do with Cloudflare or people being kicked off the internet, but just about companies who complain that it's not fair that what happens is people go on Twitter and set up a hashtag about how we're terrible and that makes us look really bad. And then you say, okay, so if we weren't to do that, how would I complain to you about a problem with your service? And they say, oh yeah, send us an email, which we won't read. Ring our premium rate phone line, which we don't publish the phone number for. And then when you do get through, you get through to someone on the other end who has no power to affect any change and isn't allowed to put you in touch with people who can affect change. Companies have spent the last, my lifetime, carefully shielding themselves from criticism. When we finally come up with a way of criticising a company that they have to listen to, is it surprising it's massively overused? It's the only weapon we've got.
No, it
totally is. If you're talking about sending an individual email to a small company, so this to take your analogy, right? If you want your large bank to stop doing some terrible thing to you, and you write them a letter, they'll just send you back a form letter going, that's company policy, get lost. If you whip up a bunch of people on Twitter, they may listen and do something about it. Now, there is the problem that you go to some nice, small, local company and you stub your toe on the way out of the door and then attempt to whip up a Twitter hate mob about how the fact they didn't buy you an ice cream because of it. And that's bad. Yes, I agree with you. And people shouldn't do that. But I think but what about the small company? We have to protect them in that situation. And the only solution we've got to protecting them is by throwing away the one weapon we've got against all the big corporates. I think we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
I don't think anyone's suggesting that you throw that away. I don't think anyone's saying that there shouldn't be a means in which a collection of people can get together to express their frustration at something. It is a powerful tool. The problem is that it's sometimes a tool that's the first port of call, as opposed to the second or the third port of call. Right?
Yeah.
So my view is this, right? If I have an issue with a company, I'm going to reach out to them and I'm going to try to resolve it. If they push me back 2 or 3 times, that's when the tweet's going to come out. That's when the hashtag's going to get formed. Like if they don't have an opportunity to rectify it, the problem that we've got is that in some situations, not all situations, the culture is basically saying, if you have a frustration about something, create a hashtag, go and get a load of other people pissed off about it, and it turns into a mob.
I think
so. It's a tool that I think is ineffectively used.
I understand what you're saying, but I think society has spent a large amount of time conditioning people that if you do all the good stuff first, it doesn't work, and the hashtag thing does work. So why would you not go for that first?
I don't think society thinks that. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I have an issue with a company, 9 times out of 10, when I call them up and talk to them about it, generally it tends to get resolved.
Ring Comcast and say, make my internet stop falling over.
I had exactly that example with Comcast. And I actually had a really good customer service experience with them.
But they haven't stopped your internet falling over.
It works fine. They did stop my internet work. You literally picked the worst possible example. Because I actually called... Now, I agree that this was not historically the case.
Okay.
But my point is that, I'll give you a few examples, right? Anytime there's an issue with Amazon, call them up, their customer service is phenomenal. It gets resolved. Anytime I have any issues with my bank, I call them up. Generally, it gets resolved pretty quickly. Like, for example, an incorrect charge was made. It gets taken off. I call Comcast. They didn't just get on the phone pretty quickly and call me back to make sure that we didn't lose the connection, but they sent someone out the following day who came through and rewired the iffy bit of my network.
Oh, well, fair play.
My point is that you're painting a very broad brush that that consumers are the oppressed, group that, and you've got this protected company class out there that doesn't give a shit about consumers. I think that increasingly we're operating in a society where customer service has to get better because people have got access to Yelp and to, Google reviews and things like that. And yes, Twitter outrage is one tool to rectify that issue. But my point is, it's got to be the nuclear option. It can't be the first option. Otherwise, all we do is we exist in a society that's just filled with annoyance and frustration and anger. And that doesn't get anybody anywhere.
That's interesting there. I didn't know about the Comcast thing, and so I withdraw that accusation. My apologies, Comcast. After having spent... How long have we been doing this show? And hearing you complain about how your internet is terrible for the whole time and having to go and kick the router and stuff like that. I didn't realise they'd actually fixed it now, so well done to them. Absolutely, that's brilliant.
Yeah, and look, and to be clear, I'm not saying for a second that other people aren't going to be having shitty experiences with Comcast. I'm just saying that I don't think it's fair to paint a broad brush when we, in reality, your accusation towards companies, you have a minute data set.
Yeah.
You're basing it on your own experiences and probably the experiences of other people that you've got. I try to have faith in people.
I think most companies are trying to do the right thing. I think I agree with Ack's position that in many cases, a lot of companies, not all, especially large ones, have optimized over the years the ability to get lost in the system in a way that often results in poor customer service.
Very true.
I think they still want to, the people on the phone still want to do the right thing. The people responding to your email really want to do the right thing. They often, as Ack mentioned, are not empowered to do so.
That's my problem. You can get through to someone, you say, here's my issue.
Look at my Motorola experience.
Yeah, that sounds terrible. Yeah, look at exactly that as a case in point. And I almost resent that more because they take decent people who want to help, put them onto the end of the phone, so all you can do is shout at these people whose fault it isn't, and therefore you don't want to shout at them because it's not their fault, but the people you want to shout at are not available. And I think people have spent... And I think companies spent that long optimising for making sure that people who make decisions don't have to listen to criticism, that now we've come up with a way of having them hear some criticism by, picking up a weapon they can't ignore, and suddenly they're all like, oh no, this is terrible. It's like, it's not terrible, it's your job. If when people rang you up, you fixed their problems, they wouldn't do it. Now, Jono, I do take your point that we are increasingly seeing a world in which the tweet is the first thing you do rather than the second.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I think it's more reasonable than you do about that, because you've obviously had a whole bunch better customer experiences than a lot of people have, I think. Or maybe everyone's just nice to you or something. I'm not sure how it works. But I think I do take your point, but I think there'd be less of an outrage culture if people stopped doing things that were so fucking outrageous.
But I just think we need to, and one element of this is, like, society is changing. We're becoming much more technically literate. You know, younger people are growing up with technology where older people obviously didn't. But to me, like, it's like anything. There's an escalating set of tools that you use. It's in the same way that anyone who's worked in a company, right? If you have a problem with something, going and whinging to your boss as the first port of call generally isn't the best approach. Like, try to rectify it, try to resolve it yourself. I mean, obviously it depends on the issue, right? You know, if you're being abused at work, this is a very different situation. But if you're having a problem with a project or something, try to rectify it yourself, try to resolve the issue in a way that can be the way you can get a practical outcome. But ultimately, sometimes you have to go nuclear. You have to go to the CEO or to the boss and say, I've tried these different things. Nothing's happening. I'm not making any progress. We have to get this fixed. Fix it, right? And to me, I see the hashtag thing as the nuclear option.
Well, so dragging this back to the original point of the discussion a little bit.
We have got a bit off track.
Do we have an original point? I would like to take this time out to say, don't yell at support people, please. Public service announcement. Never, ever yell at support people.
No, I agree.
It's never their fault. And
it's never their fault.
I hate it because, like, you think, I know it's not your fault. I'm incredibly frustrated. You're trying your best to help, but all you can say is, I can't help you because I'm not allowed to. And then I just have to sit here and fume and do nothing about it. While, meanwhile, some guy's sitting at the top going, ha, 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 and just raking in the dividends, wanker. Anyway, so...
Okay, now I'll let you drag it back now.
Dragging it back to the point.
Just one tiny addition to that as well is, if you are talking to your customer support representatives, right? A, don't just be a dick to them, but B, always say to them, I know this isn't your fault, okay?
I always
say that because you will get better customer service if you say that.
Yeah. It's like...
Anyway, carry on.
It's like a shibboleth. But, yeah, right. So dragging this back around to the point of it, what we were talking about is who cuts this kind of thing off, and PR storms get Cloudflare to do work on this, whereas other things don't. But in this case, it has happened. A PR storm did get Cloudflare to pull this off, or at least the perception of PR. And yeah, maybe we'd like companies to do things for the right reason, but realistically, as far as I can think, there are only really two things that will influence a company to take a course of action that you deem appropriate. One of them is the profit motive. So you either make it profitable to do the thing you want, or you make it unprofitable to not do the thing you want.
Right.
Or it's PR. You make it so it's embarrassing to not do the thing you want, right?
Yeah.
And those are essentially the only two tools we have for influencing company behaviour. With governments, there's you don't have the profit motive, and that you do have the embarrassment motive, and potentially you have will vote you out, but then we get into a whole discussion about politics and how it works and so on, which we're not going to get into because the show would be a million years long.
I don't know if I agree with your assessment, and I have opinions, but let's not get off on a tangent there.
Interesting. This could be the next show then, perhaps. But yeah, so going back to Kevin Roos's original tweet, I think the way people are attempting to influence Facebook to ban extreme content is by having lots and lots and lots of people say, this is terrible, Facebook, do something about it. Where the problem comes in is it conflicts with the profit motive. So if a company can make a bunch of money by doing something and they get a bunch of embarrassment by doing that same thing, what wins out? What's more important to them? Is it the fact that they make the money by doing it, or is it the fact that they don't want to be embarrassed and lose mind share and market share and appreciation? And realistically, the only way to fix that is to make it more and more and more embarrassing until they go, we don't care how much money we make out of this, we're going to stop doing it anyway, which is what people are trying to do with Facebook.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be both to that, right?
Yeah.
Both of those things are going to be a consideration, I suspect. But
Although,
Yeah, I mean,
Jeremy,
I don't
you've
know.
been terribly quiet for the last little bit, possibly while Jono and I are just having a fist fight.
Just listening to both of your worldviews and taking it all in.
Yeah, he was literally like filing his nails on the video stream while we were talking.
When I have an opinion on something, I'll interject. Don't you worry.
But, yeah, so...
Where do we think it's going to go then?
Yeah.
Where do we think it's? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, I agree. I agree with what you were saying, Ak, about the worry about the outrage piece potentially impacting companies like Cloudflare, getting to the level of granularity such as stand-up comedians that I was touching on earlier on. I agree with you that that's probably pretty unlikely, and it's while it may be a trend that could potentially head in that direction, it's unlikely to get that far. So it's probably good that generally when we're hearing about these cases, it's cases such as 8chan, right?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a bunch of issues with PayPal refusing to take payments for companies or organisations or whatever, and you think, but that's really unfair. Now they can't get paid. But one of the semi-useful things about that is there are a bunch of alternatives. As far as I'm aware, there aren't really any alternatives to Cloudflare if what you want out of them is DDoS protection and a bit of caching, and you don't want to pay very much or anything for it.
No, I mean, they have multiple viable competitors.
Really?
Yeah.
Who make it? I mean, there are certainly CDNs, things like that, but that's a whole bunch of extra work for me. Cloudflare,
there's a bunch of them. There's SecureEye. There's one that is I'm not thinking of it the second. Also, Amazon has a competitor to it. Google has a competitor to it in GCP.
No, okay. I mean, I was thinking fairly small scale, but having protected a couple of things with Cloudflare, it was literally just go
Encapsula was the other one. Like Encapsula and is very similar, also pretty inexpensive, also high quality.
Oh, okay. In that case, I stand back from that. I mean,
none of them have the scale of Cloudflare, which I believe has over 10% of the internet, or some bonkers number at this point, including many of the largest sites.
Yeah, but that's
sounds
fine. If they haven't got the scale, that's because not that many people. They don't need as many servers because not many people using them. When more people use them, they'll buy more servers. Not a problem.
So it sounds like broadly on this, bringing it to the original topic at hand, it sounds like broadly the three of us are of the view that the current system, which might be a first for Bad Voltage, the current system of the commercial sector making these decisions, we're generally okay with, because currently the decisions they're making are broadly in line with, well, I can't think of an example where I'm not in agreement, but broadly, very much broadly in line with what we think. Like, all three of us clearly don't want 8chan on the internet, but it sounds like we're broadly, and while there is the possibility of abuse, of companies making bad decisions, it sounds like we're basically okay with that, because even if you had the government making these decisions, there's risk of abuse there as well.
Yeah. So going back to Ak's original question, though, which government? When we ask the question of private companies, we know which private companies, because it's clear which private companies the internet flow through. So there's a well-defined set of organizations that we can identify. Whether we agree with their decisions or not, at least the scope of the problem is well understood. If it was government, I don't even know how to define that. Because
it's obviously the Illuminati.
Right, there's no world government that would get to decide. There's no...
That's where you're wrong, Jeremy.
It's the UN of the internet.
Wake up, sheeple. The one world government is here. I'm only saying this. I'm only saying this because there's a black helicopter hovering outside my window right now.
Yeah, you see the A in Garcia. There's two A's, two triangles.
But yeah,
so just leave it all up to Bilderberg or whatever it is.
Yeah, Bilderberg.
Well, that's the Open Source Summit, isn't it?
So you need to get hip with the conspiracy action, man. The Bilderberg people haven't been a problem since the 70s. It's all the Trilateral Commission now.
I've never even heard of that. Trilateral. All right. Well, I know what I'm going to be googling tonight.
This is what I'm saying, man. Wake up, sheeple. But my objections to having a bunch of unelected big companies deciding what happens on the internet are all quite theoretical. If you look at it in practice, a de facto objection would be these are a whole bunch of individual things they're doing wrong and I have a better solution. And largely I don't. They do approximately overlap with the way I think it should work. I wish they were quicker to take action on this sort of thing, but it does seem to kind of eventually happen. It does seem to kind of be right.
So I think where I draw the line is I'm probably, and I to be honest, never really thought about this, but I think internet access maybe should be more of a utility because it is becoming really a basic need. Where I don't imagine Cloudflare or Facebook ever becoming utilities because I don't think the service they provide is of that level. So I think that's why people fundamentally don't think Comcast, to use your example before, should block it because you are paying to access the internet for whatever that means. Yeah. Where when you access Facebook, you're going to access Facebook. So they're very much different philosophically, I think.
Yeah, and that's what got a lot of people's knickers in a twist about the net neutrality thing, where that was ISPs who are meant to be just a pipe by which the internet arrives in your house started deciding which bits of it arrived in your house. But yeah, and to take the public utility point at an ISP level, fine, actual ISPs are not, they're mostly companies, but I don't think there's a government on earth which doesn't have as part of its policy bring the internet to more people in our country. Everyone's doing it.
I think the United States' many of their policies actively discriminate in that regard. Many municipal areas have tried to bring internet as a public good to their own municipality, only to be blocked by regulations or rules lobbied for by. Yes. So I don't know that I agree with your assertion.
That's de facto rather than de jure again, right? I'm sure that the US government has a policy that everyone should have access to the internet. We want to make that happen. However, if you then look at it and go, okay, we've tried to make it happen and your stupid rules blocked us, they go, oh, no, but it's still a policy. What you're saying is they de facto have a policy of not doing that, and I would agree with that entirely.
Well, the other element, and this is a giant discussion that we don't have the time for right now, but the other element to this, of course, is then the attitudes. If we're talking about the internet as a utility, a public utility, there is then the attitude towards the role of data in that, right? So I watched this, the new documentary on Netflix that I think it's called The Great Hack, which is about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which I would
worth watching. I have not seen it. Is it worth watching?
It's really, really good. It's well worth watching. It's super well produced, fascinating, and I won't give it away, but basically there's...
I mean, you won't give it away? There's not a surprise ending to this. I read it in the newspaper.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't know what happened.
Oh, okay.
Not everybody looks at the world through your eyes.
Just a question: is it a documentary or is it a
documentary?
Right. So is Carol Cadwalder in it and people like that? Or
yeah, she's in that. Okay. And then, so in a nutshell, basically, it's about this guy who basically goes to Cambridge Analytica and says, "Okay, so I've heard that you're taking all of my data. I want it back." And he basically says, access to my data is a human right. And that's what he's essentially lobbying for. And the documentary follows him as well as two whistleblowers from Cambridge Analytica and Carol, what was her name? Cadwalder. Yeah, who I think she won like a Pulitzer or something like that for her reporting on this. So
yeah, won a bunch of stuff. Very good reporter.
Yeah, it's really good. It's well worth watching. But the key takeaway that came out of that for me was, it's like what do we think of data when it comes to being a human right? Well, and what does that look like?
I'll be honest with you. I mean, and yes, this is not necessarily a door we want to open 2 minutes before the end of the episode, but that is largely what GDPR does. You do have the right to access your data. You can demand it from companies. They have to provide it to you. A bunch of this stuff is already happening, just not in the United States of America. Although maybe it's going to happen in California soon, I've seen.
Who knows? Who knows? Anything's possible.
Yes.
Well, we should probably think about wrapping up because we've been, this is another one of those segments where we're like, are we going to be able to do a whole show on this? Yeah, we could do 10.
Yeah, without even a problem. Just as an aside, we've brought in how politics works, how the internet works, how data works. We could do like a series on this, man.
Yeah, the Bilderberg. Jeremy's entrenchment into the single world government. I mean, Yeah. But there's so much on this. We would love to hear what our community thinks about this. I mean, there's so many things we've touched on. I mean, obviously the specific instance of 8chan and Cloudflare, but what do you think about who should be making these decisions about who gets access to these parts of the internet? What about the dark web?
Such a prick.
Just send that to,
honestly.
just send that to piss him off now.
And to clarify on that, I am entirely at home to the idea of people feeling uncomfortable and disquieted that a whole bunch of decisions about how the internet works are being made by a bunch of companies who aren't responsible to you and almost all in California. I'm cool with that, but the reason I'm not objecting to it too hard is that I don't have a better answer. If you've got a better answer... then I'd like to hear it, because my better answer before was exactly the same as Jeremy's was. We just give the internet to everybody and then it's all nice. And it has not turned out that way. So this is me attempting this is me attempting to learn from experience and not just go, but we should keep doing that and then it will be nice eventually. That idea sounded good, didn't actually work out.
There's always someone who ruins it for everyone else.
Yeah,
I love people.
Yeah, Jono.
There's always some. Thank you. Really, am I the dark web component of the Bad Voltage team?
My only hope now is the dark web is the word of the year or something.
I know. I'm going to keep using it, even out of context. Like, we're going to go down the pub. Like, do you want a dark web or an IPA? Could someone create a beer called the dark web that is a... What kind of beer do you like to drink? You like IPAs, right?
Yeah.
You like drinks that you have to slice that old men drink, don't you? So.
You watch Shock Top will bring out another one called the dark web, and it'll be purple.
Brilliant. All right. Well, always a pleasure, chaps. And we'll catch you on the other side.
It's been real.